So anytime you pick up your Bible and you turn to Leviticus 23, remember it's about a calendar, God's calendar. That's why I started talking about calendars. Okay. So the major Old Testament Israelite festivals were in calendar order. I mean, look at this slide. Passover, right here. Passover, huh? Unleavened bread, first fruits, the feast of weeks, which is also called Pentecost, by the way, the feast of trumpets, the day of atonement, and the feast of booths, which is also called tabernacles or ingathering. All right. So these that we see here are the main what festivals or feasts of the Jews. You see the number 7. You see, you remember we did the numbers. So when you look at this here, you see seven major what feasts that God put in place for His people and in order in terms of a calendar. That is why again, so that is why why like I say, I talked about the Passover. The Jews celebrate the Passover in accordance with what the lunisolar calendar. So it starts. So their calendar starts really from that time going down, right? So after the exile, the Jews added memorial days for the fall of Jerusalem. That's and then that's what we have about. So I know you're aware of this, like the Purim, the Feast of Dedication, which are called Hanukkah, right? They added other feasts or festivals. Also, in addition, the Israelites observed the Sabbath every week and the feast of the new moon every lunar month. So these are extra feasts that the Jews added to what God had, what we see right here on this screen. That we see here right on this screen, right? So the feast of the new moon every lunar month, they have that according to their culture. See, we all need calendars because as a system, calendars help us to organize our days. Calendars are a normal part of our modern busy world, but in a way, they weren't that important to the people of Israel in Moses' days. So this is what they have. The Israelites, they started what? In the evening. You remember what we said in Genesis? The day started in the evening. But they worked from sunrise to sunset. And as I said earlier, they counted the months by the phases of the moon. Furthermore, according to Genesis 8, verse 22, Genesis 8:22, you know what it says? It says, God had promised them seed time and harvest, and cold and heat, and summer and winter, and day and night. So what we're seeing here is that God has laid out a calendar for us to use. Already, God has laid it out all out for us to use. And so to the people of Israel, each day was a sacred gift from God. See, all this talk about calendars is what takes us and leads us into the book of Leviticus, specifically Leviticus 23. All right. So before we go into Leviticus 23, any question, any comment before we go into Leviticus 23? Okay. If there's a question or a comment, please just tell me, and I'm gonna halt. All right. So Leviticus 23 is what 44 verses. It is Israel's religious calendar, or it is the calendar of the people of God. And versions of this calendar, versions of this feast, Leviticus 23, are found, I have the verses right up here. Versions of this are found in Exodus 30, Exodus 23, Exodus 34, Deuteronomy 16, Numbers 28, 29. So over here, there are versions of this of Leviticus 23. And these references here, each has its own characteristics and emphasis. For example, here in Leviticus 23, there's a list of the sacrifices that are required throughout the year. And here in Leviticus 23, this list is intertwined with what I would call 8 important festivals. So you see, I said 8, but here we see 7, right? I'll tell you why I'm using the number 8. I'll tell you why in a minute. And so here in Leviticus 23, this list, like I said, 8 important festivals. So I say what? The addition that I have is the Sabbath. Because in verse 2, Leviticus 23, verse 2 talks about the Sabbath. Oh, let me see where I am. It says Leviticus 23, verse 2 says, "Speak to the children of Israel and say to them, the feast of the Lord which you shall proclaim to be holy convocations, these are my feasts." Then verse 3 says, 6 days shall work be done, but the seventh day is a Sabbath of solemn rest. So I'm adding that to these feasts. So then the various feasts that are found in this chapter include, I mentioned them again, they're right here on the slide, and you can see the month in which they are found. So Passover, unleavened bread, first fruits, all in the month of Nisan, right? Spring. And then we have Pentecost, 50 days after. And then we have the fall feast, all total, all of these total 7. If you add the Sabbath, which I just read in Leviticus 23:3, it makes it 8. But not this is what I'm saying. This is why I'm including the Sabbath. It is not one of the feasts. Let me clarify that. It is not one of the feasts. So though I say 8, the Sabbath isn't technically a feast day, as you already know, right? But you can see how and why it is attached, included, appended here in this chapter. Which is what? Well, not only was the Sabbath one of the annual feasts etched into this chapter, because we know what Exodus 20, verse 28, 11 says, right? The Sabbath was an important day for the Israelites, and they were expected to honor it. And Numbers tells us that if it is not honored, it will be the penalty of death if they violated honoring the Sabbath day. So the Sabbath is included here in Leviticus 23 as the governing principle in the feast of the Lord. The Sabbath is when God finished everything and rested. And God included it right here, that when you're celebrating these things, your calendar is what is a holy thing. It starts with the 7th day, the rest that God had. So in other words, this annual cycle of feasts from spring to fall, and its center and starting point is what? This Sabbath. See what I mean? The Sabbath is so important. It is the center, the starting point, and the end. So God is saying, if you're going to party, I've given you opportunity to party, but remember, the partying that you're partying, the eating and stuff like that, it's a holy thing, because then he puts in the Sabbath. So we know why God gave us the Sabbath. For many reasons. It was a special sign between God and his covenant people, for rest and refreshment for the people, The, not only for people, but for farm animals, for the land as well. It's also to mark what? It's also to mark its importance as a day devoted to God. So that's why the parties, the feasts that God has put in there, the calendar starts with what? An acknowledgement and a worship of God. When you start with the right attitude, when we start with the right approach, when you start with the right spirit, it will govern your behavior when you're celebrating the feast, because you know the feast belongs to the Lord. That's what it says in verse 2. Matter of fact, when you read it, Leviticus 23, verse 2, it says what? Leviticus 23, 2 says, speak to the children of Israel and say to them, the feast of the Lord. That means the feasts are his. The feast of the Lord. You see? So God starts it with this Sabbath, these 7 feasts that we see right here on this screen. So it is important that the party be governed by an acknowledgement of who God is, a worship, reverence, devotion to God. And here it's also the Sabbath here is also helps us to or helps to give us a sense of how they calculated time during that period. You see the importance of the Sabbath, how they calculate time during that period. This is also very interesting, and I find this very interesting because to know, because much of the rest of civilization at that time and in the ancient Near East had calendars. You see that? I talked about Egypt, right? I talked about Ethiopia. Babylon, they all had calendars at the time, but their calendars were recognized the sun and the moon, which is today, but to the extent that they had moon gods, sun gods. You remember when we did the beginning of Exodus with Moses, they had those gods. Also with when we studied Joseph. See, so these Israelite neighbors had their own calendars, but it looked at their gods. Today, those who are in Afrocentrism will tell you that, well, the Bible copied from the Bible copied from Egypt and yeah, Egypt. They say Moses copied from Egypt. Of course, Moses lived in Egypt. He grew up there, so that's where he got his knowledge and learning from. So so when those Afrocentrics try to derail you with these arguments, it's I just well, you know what I mean. So while Israel's calendar did not neglect lunar and solar cycles, the people paid less attention to equinoxes and solstices. They didn't have to deal with sun gods and moon gods like their neighbors. They only had to deal with one God, God the Creator. But they recognized what God had put in place to help them what? Calculate the seasons, the months, the years. So these feasts in Leviticus 23 are agricultural in nature. You can see Passover, related to food, to an animal, unleavened bread, first fruits, Pentecost. You know, they agricultural in nature. They mark the various stages in the agricultural year. Therefore, these were what? These were celebration of harvest, while also giving both credit and a sacrificial portion back to God. So that's why when we party, we think when we're celebrating, we recognize who God is, how He's blessed us. So when we say we're having a barbecue or whatever it is, we remember that it's God who we party to the glory of God. Remember Job and his children. When Job's children were going to party, Job would pray for them. After he prayed for them, just so that they have done what is right in God's sight. Right. So as believers, we recognize that. And this is what this here is showing: a celebration of harvest while giving God the glory, giving Him His sacrificial portion. of what he's blessed them with. He's provided them with all this bounty. So they say, Lord, we're giving back to you. Now, several of these feasts that we see right here, several of these feasts also became related to historical events. And by the way, the agricultural seasons ultimately linked to what? Linked to the solar cycles. So the lunar month year system that was used throughout the ancient Near East had to be what? Periodically adjusted to the solar cycle. You see, that's why I said in the beginning, the Jews, they used the lunisolar calendar, the lunisolar calendar. See, and that's why, and that's why in those parts of the world, sometimes they have a 13th month, right? Because a few days were added in length when the priest at the time determined that an adjustment was needed. So the calendar that the people of Israel received from God was tied to the rhythm of the seasons and the history of the nation. When you read Leviticus 23, in a way, it was an unusual calendar because it not only summarized what God had done for them in the past. Listen carefully now. But it also, listen carefully, it also anticipated what God will do for them in the future. So when we pick up the Bible and we crack open the New Testament, remember this: the salvation work of Jesus Christ, who is the who is the founder of the church, and the future of the people of Israel can all be traced back to Leviticus 23 too, because these feasts that we see here are what? Are shadows of what was going to happen in the New Testament. It's all related to, connected to Jesus Christ. These feasts that we see right here. I don't want to go ahead of myself, but Pentecost. That was when what? The church was founded, right? That was when the church was founded. Pentecost. The 50 days after 50 days after what? 50 days after the Passover. Pentecost. Passover. Passover. This Passover right here that we see, this Passover right here. What did it do? It pointed to who? It pointed to the death of Christ. Unleavened bread. Unleavened bread here, this one here. It represents what? Christ's sinlessness. The unleavened bread. First fruits. Resurrection of Jesus Christ. So these feasts here point to something, point to the New Testament. So when we hear preachers today saying, well, the Old Testament is passe, we don't need the Old Testament, we don't need to forget about the Old Testament. Any preacher who says that is a false preacher, is a false teacher, it's not a man of God. It's not a man of God, period. Any preacher who says that is serving the enemy Satan. Any preacher who says, well, forget about the Old Testament, or these are not important, these feasts are not important. No. They are important because they are typologies. They point to Jesus Christ coming, his death, his sinlessness, his resurrection, the outpouring of the Holy Spirit. Pentecost, you know what happened on the day of Pentecost? You see, it all points to that. I mean, the trumpet, for example, the trumpet refers to what? The regathering of the people of Israel. Remember when we did Revelation, we talked about it? The trumpet. You see? So all these here, the atonement is right there. Tabernacles is right there. Tabernacles refers to rest and the reunion with Christ when Christ returns. So all these here, all these 7 feasts of God are important. Now, you know what is interesting about these feasts that we're talking about? What else is interesting about these feasts? In this chapter, Leviticus 23, these special days are called, listen carefully, these special days are called feasts 9 times. and holy convocation 10 times. If you read it, you read Leviticus 23. So you know what I'm talking about, right? They call 9 times they refer to as feast, and 10 times as holy convocation. But here's the thing that I want us to get. The word feast, right? The word feast, for example, Leviticus 23:2, don't always have to do with eating. See, it doesn't, it says the feast of the Lord, but it doesn't always have to do with eating. What do I mean? I mean, look at it. Look at this one. Look at this word here. The month of Tishri, the atonement. The day of atonement is not about food, it's about fasting. The day of atonement is about fasting, it's not about food. So, what did they do on the day of atonement? They fasted. See that? And you know what else? You know what else is interesting here? This word used for feast here, you know what it means? It means appointed times. Appointed times. Appointed times. And the other word, the convocation that's used here, convocation, Leviticus 23, it gives the idea that during each of these feasts, all the people met together as a congregation. But that's not the case, because there were special gatherings on some of the special days. You see? And this word that is translated convocation, it actually means proclamation. Proclamation. To proclaim or to announce. So if I want to put it roundly, what this is saying is that the Lord, talking about the feast, right? The Lord appointed and announced these events which the people of Israel faithfully had to celebrate. That's what it means. So this whole chapter, Leviticus about feast, you can summarize it this way. The Lord, without even using the word feast, the Lord appointed and announced these events which the people faithfully had to celebrate. You can use you can say that without mentioning the word feast. See that? And you can do that because they point to something coming in the future. They point to God fulfilling his promise that he was going to what? He was going to send a sacrifice to redeem man from the clutches of sin. From the clutches of sin.